Welcome to New Game Plus, and welcome to Retro Recap number 12.
12.
But that wasn't...
That's a dozen retro recaps. At retro recap like 20 to 25, are we gonna have a recap?
You want to start over?
I want to start over. Not only this episode and not only this podcast,
but life,
but really my life and like the day that I walked into history class and met Kenny.
Y'all locked eyes and fell in love.
Okay. Listen, last Retro Recap 11, we tried something new by having 3 members from our community host the episode.
Yeah, well, that was scary for us. We've never, ever done that.
Yeah, it was crazy and different and kind of bold, but then ended up being a kind of wonderfully nice little moment.
Yeah, it was awesome.
We loved it.
Kenny, it was both bold and beautiful because those 3 took that episode and did so well with it. And all the feedback that we heard from our community and others seemed to really enjoy it. So we thought it went so well that we would do it again, this time with a new cast. So we do have one that is returning. That is Garlyle. Garlyle will be returning. Garlyle, of course, is a director of New Game Plus and the host of the What Am I Podcasting For podcast, which he just got to his anniversary episode, and I realized for the first time, I don't know why I didn't realize this before, why he called his podcast that, and now it makes sense. And you guys would have to listen, but Sorry. Also, we are having 2 new members join for the Retro Recap for the very first time. Klen is going to be joining. Klen is a part of our community, and he's the host of the podcast Hindsight, as well as the co-host of Alter Narratives. And then we're having Brojem join, which Brojem, of course, he is a Lego building extraordinaire.
Yes, he has a podcast called I'm the Lego Building Extraordinaire.
I don't think he started a podcast yet, but a podcast talking about building Legos, that is meta.
Somebody would listen to that. I would.
I'm sure there is one, right?
No.
I'm sure there's some Lego related podcast.
Well,
there has to be.
If not, Brojem is about to start it. So what you're about to listen to is Retro Recap 12, where the 3 of these guys will be recapping the last 20 or so games and episodes of New Game Plus. Enjoy.
Bye.
Welcome to New Game Plus, a retro gaming podcast where 3 fans spend 22 weeks listening to one podcast where 3 guys spend 7 days playing one old game, and then they talk about it, and then we talk about it. I'm not Dustin, I'm Garlyle.
I'm not Kenny, I'm Austin, or Klen.
I'm not Nolan, I'm Christopher, or Brojem.
And this is Retro Recap 12. We're here to take a walk down memory lane with half a year of classic games and special episodes. And while Dustin introduced all 3 of us, not everybody listening at home may recognize our voices, so please introduce yourselves and give us a quick history of your connection to New Game Plus. Klen, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined New Game Plus. I found the Rocket Robot on Wheels episode, which I guess you might have actually heard in the anniversary episode recently. I talked about that a little bit. And I have been playing along and listening along ever since.
My name's Christopher, or Brojem. You might recognize my voice. I did have a director episode for Jet Force Gemini where I came on and talked about it. Not my favorite game of all time, but one of my childhood favorites. I found the podcast I was Googling Link to the Past and found that episode there. Then I went back and listened to the whole thing, which is the proper way of doing it. It was a rough first episode, but I caught up about episode 100, and that was Metroid, and I've been listening ever since.
And I'm Garlyle. I've been here on and off. You've been hearing my comments and commentary for a couple hundred episodes now, or close to it, what feels like it. And I even had a director episode for Live Alive, and I was here for the last Retro Recap. Since then, we've had 22 games, 3 of which weren't voted on due to director episodes. Interestingly, it's almost split 50-50. 10 of the games got New Game Plus, 9 of the games got no New Game Plus, and only 3 of the games weren't unanimous votes. Kenny disagreed twice, Nolan once, and Dustin never with the majority, which was really interesting. But suffice to say, I don't think everybody's going to agree with every decision the guys made this time as we take this little trip down memory lane and inspect the past.
Like in our retro game of the first one.
Thank you.
Gadget. All right, so our first one that we're going to hit is episode 285, which was Inspector Gadget. So first question, who actually watched this show? I certainly did.
Oh, I did, for sure.
I don't think I ever did. I might have seen like an episode once when I was a kid, but that was it.
Yeah, it's one of those ones you either saw it or you didn't. I know it's still on somewhere, but I really feel this game did a lot of good things for the IP, but they were really underutilized, especially in the gadgets. They were really underutilized in the game, I feel like.
See, and I thought there were plenty of gadgets. I just didn't think the game was super good. I spent more time watching the cartoon on that week than I'd spent playing the game. So
yeah, I can understand that. It's like it isn't necessarily a bad platformer. It's just kind of a little under-realized, and like all the little stuff, like animations were just so stiff, which is weird for a cartoon.
Yeah, and I think the boss fights they mentioned, especially that like the gadgets weren't used on those, and so it's just a little underwhelming. I think there was more talk on the podcast about the movie and the show than there was about the actual game.
yeah, I think underwhelming is a really great like one word to leave that episode with, or the game at least.
Well, Klen, do you remember your commentary on that?
You know, I don't, and that's probably a sign about the game itself.
It was literally 2 words. It's fine. That was your commentary.
That was that week.
That's spot on.
Yep. That was pretty much it. Well, after It's Fine, we moved on to a game that, in I think everybody's opinion, is much more than fine. We played Trauma Center Under the Knife. It is the first DS game we played on New Game Plus, if I believe correctly.
This one was really interesting, just on a personal note to go back to, because I had played every other entry in the series, because I love them all, but I'd never actually gone back to play the DS version of the original. I'd only ever played the Wii version of it. And, man, it was tougher than I was expecting. Like, it's a tough series, but, man, that was... I could not finish it, and that's the first one I've had to say that about.
Yeah, it's a really, really hard game.
I actually bought, on your recommendation, I bought Second Opinion. It's coming in the mail someday, because I do want to play this game. It was so highly regarded on the podcast. I don't know why I didn't have this game. I owned every DS. Like, Nintendo has all of my money. I owned DSi, DS Lite, DSi, like all of the DSs I have had. So I don't know how I missed this one, but I'm kind of disappointed I did.
It's never too late.
No, and although ironically I'm getting the one on the Wii, but I do plan on playing it as soon as it comes in the mail, so I'm hoping I get a chance to experience it, because I didn't experience most of these games with you guys. I don't emulate for reasons that I won't go into, but mostly because I take lie detector tests and it came up on the last one. So I don't anymore. But I hope I get to play this one soon.
Yeah, none of our hosts had experienced it before that week, and so, like, I think it was either Kenny or Dustin, like, barely had any DS experience at all, and this was an extremely DS game, so it's a very interesting thing to hear them experience.
I think it might have even been both of them hadn't really done DS stuff at all.
Yeah, how do we feel about DS emulation, speaking of, because Nolan was extremely against saying that should be an aged factor. I think it is an aging factor. The fact that if you don't have your DS with your stylus, this is a different game. So how do you guys feel about that?
I mean, there is stuff these days. Like, you can get solid tools to play DS games on your phone, so there is solutions, but they're definitely less accessible than a lot of other retro consoles. And like, we're actually hitting an era where just like very shortly here, the Nintendo Wii will become qualified for NGP, which when we come into a game that requires those motion controls and stuff for NGP, that'll be quite the discussion to have.
Hear that, Klen? We're gonna play Metroid Other M.
Maybe someday, if we're so lucky.
No. Request denied.
Oh, no.
After that, we moved into the start of our summer Patreon pool, which was 5 straight weeks of Patreon-selected games, bringing us some of the best that we've had in quite a while, and we kicked it off with the PS1 and Dreamcast RPG Grandia. PS1 and Saturn, something like that.
Yeah, PS1 and Saturn.
So I was aware of Grandia, but I had never played it. Like, it was around, and I had seen people own it and say it was good, but I had never seen anything about it. And I was kind of blown away, but for like about an hour or two. And then I think the thrill kind of wore off for me.
Yeah, it's funny. Garlyle's director episode for Live Alive, I realized I don't like JRPGs. I actually love that game, but it revealed that I don't like other JRPGs because I love that game so much. And for some reason, Grandia didn't set that off. It should have. I spent 30 minutes not combating anything, running around playing hide and seek and looking for pot lids. So I should have hated this game, but I didn't.
Yeah, the game at least has like a lot of personality to it, which helps a lot in getting you attached to a game. And the battles feel like they're technically still turn-based, but they're a little bit more active. It's actually still surprising to me that I didn't go back and like finish it that week, because it's the only Grandia main series title I haven't finished, despite the fact that I'm like, my name doesn't come from there, but it's in there, you'd think.
It is in there. That was a big a point of conversation that week for sure.
Garlyle's the bad guy of
the
this
Garlyle armies.
I swear I didn't do anything.
I do want to mention in the intro of the Grandia episode, they were talking about Games Done Quick that was coming up that week. And Nolan did foretell an upcoming episode about 2 months early for a game that he was really looking forward to playing on the podcast. And I'll mention it when we get there. But
there you go. Stay tuned. So, speaking of things that need to be punched, we weren't speaking of that, but our next game was Streets of Rage, which Kenny came in strong on this episode right at the beginning, and props to our ex-editor Tom. Kenny came in with a noogie punching comment, which really set the tone for this episode.
Yeah, this was Streets of Rage 2 is one of those beat 'em ups that you always hear about if people are talking about like, oh hey, what's the best ones to play? What's the best ones to go back to? And it was interesting going back and seeing like some of the things that I expect from modern beat 'em ups in terms of like enemy variety and like defense options weren't there, but in some other ways it feels really modern. And that soundtrack is so good.
The music, I think, is the only thing I liked about this game. I am not a beat 'em up fan. I am not good at them. I don't like them. And this had everything that I should. I love the animations. I love the music. I love Sega Genesis. Just like Nolan, I am a Sega boy. That's the one I grew up with. I didn't have a Super NES or anything like that. But I'm just bad. Everything feels inconsistent. I don't know if that's just because I'm bad at games, but all the moves, I know the moves. I read the instruction manuals. I study how to do it. And I still can't do it. It feels so inconsistent and unfair, and I feel like I'm just absorbing damage the whole time.
Yeah, I can't get into beat 'em ups either. I've tried, I've played them my whole life, and I just don't like them. I can't get into it. Speaking of animations, though, I was reminded someone had mentioned how the second stage, the carousel or whatever it was, the park, the parallax is backwards, so the fence was moving the wrong way. Anyone remember that being mentioned?
I don't remember that.
And it just ruined that stage for so many people that week.
Maybe they fixed it in the because I played it the Steam version. They have a Sega collection, so maybe they fixed it and I just didn't notice it.
I don't remember that.
That's where I played it, and it was definitely there. But once it's pointed out, you can't unsee it.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
So enjoy going back to that one.
Well, and there's a lot of things I didn't like about it, so I was probably distracted. And I know people are yelling at their radios, their phones, whatever they listen to podcasts on. I'm sorry. I know this is a good game, and it's my fault that I don't like it. But like this special, it drains your health. I hate that. I just, it bothers me.
Speaking of radios and listening to podcasts,
and speaking of
the next game,
speaking of things people didn't like, and incorrectly so. Listen, I'm
set radio.
AKA, I am ready to fight the guys over this one.
Oh yeah.
I will join that fight. I loved this game.
I mean, okay, I get it. Like, there's problems this game has. I'm not going to pretend it's a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. And, like, I get why people wouldn't like it. I get why the guys would bounce off of it. But also, it's one of those games that has such a unique design and charm and appeal that, like, you have to go out and you have to try it at some point to find out if you like it. Because it's not like, oh, you like this game? Well, maybe you'll like Jet Set Radio too. It's its own thing, and those are really rare in gaming.
I think I would compare it to Katamari. Like, both of those games are so wacky, so weird, and have such unique control schemes that you're either going to fall in love with it completely, or you are going to bounce right off. And the other thing I wasn't expecting was all of the controversy on the soundtrack for Jet Set Radio.
Okay, can I talk about this a moment? Okay.
Are you going to be wrong about it?
You've heard of enhanced interrogation, right? Like Getmo? That's what this soundtrack was like. It was like someone was trying to torture me. And the more I listened to, I actually ended up turning the sound off that week, because I couldn't. I was trying to enjoy the game, but just coming at you. I couldn't. Oh, I hate this soundtrack. And I'm the hater. I get it, guys. I get that I'm the outsider on this one. But Kenny said it on the podcast. It was like I was being punished the more I played. I mean, and Shauna, I love you. I know this is your game, and listen to Shauna Games. Go watch her YouTube videos. But this game, the gameplay wasn't enough to redeem the fact that it just was a piece of 90s culture, and I love the fact that it was so true to that culture. But if you're not part of it and you don't like it, it's just gonna turn you off, and it's not gonna be a fun experience.
I don't agree, but that's okay.
Let's talk about Metroid Other M again.
A game that far fewer people would disagree on, however, is Super Mario Brothers. Yes, the original, and yes, brothers, fight me, Dustin.
Yeah, are we? Where do we fall on that? Because Dustin's completely wrong. It's Super Mario Brothers. Klen, are we in agreement?
Yeah, I don't actually. I must have put it out of my memory because I don't remember.
It's written as bros with like the little short form period at the end.
Oh yeah. Oh, that, yeah.
Well, Dustin also said he liked Super Mario Brothers 2 on the podcast this episode, so let's just discount his opinions, I would say.
Dustin can troll as much as he wants.
Well, okay, I have a question about this
But episode. I like Mario Bros. too.
Did you guys know A+ Start? Did you know that? I did not know that.
No, I didn't, and a childhood me wishes I did.
Yeah, this would have changed the game growing up. Obviously, I don't know about you two, but I grew up playing this game. I've owned 50 versions of it. A+ start that allows you, if you're listening to this and you're like me and didn't know it, you can, after you die and game over, you can hold A+ start a new game. It will start you at the beginning of the world you died on. It's a continue and it's unlimited. And I never knew about that. It changes the game.
So, two things. Even with that, I still haven't beaten this game.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed, there's been some talk, like, with gamers, newer gamers, not catching on to certain things in game design. One of those things with, like, Metroid Dread had a little bit of this, where people didn't understand, like, jump height mechanics. Mario Bros. Teaches that naturally in that first level. They have a short pipe and then a long pipe, and you have to hold it to get over the long pipe. And every gamer who's played Mario Brothers understands to hold down the button because of that.
Yeah. My first memories, literally the first thing I can remember in my life, is running into the Goomba in 1-1, which is probably why I'm still playing video games to this day. But it's weird for me to think back sometimes and realize that, like, so many things I take for granted in gaming and expectations in gaming and control are literally because I grew up on this, and it just had such an impact on how every game since has been designed.
Man, I think we all could go into our nostalgia on this one. This is the only video game my mother has ever played. She literally fell down the first hole twice, then jumped over the first hole, fell down the second hole, and then never played a video game ever in her life.
It's also one of the few games I've played with my mom. So that's a lot of fun.
Speaking of games that I missed growing up, because I think everyone played this one growing up and I didn't. Super Metroid. Such a flagship title. I think Nolan lost his mind when it was randomized in the last episode. But it is a genre-defining one, I think. It was talked a lot about because Dread is really in that vein of it. And I personally, loving Super Metroid and then getting to play Metroid Dread very recently, I just have loved this series. It's my favorite series ever since Breath of the Wild ruined Zelda. And I love this game. I could talk about it for 4 hours.
I mean, unfortunately, the guys haven't given us 4 hours. This was the last entrance in the summer Patreon pool. People have been pulling to try to get it drawn the entire summer, and then finally, like, the producers in general just went, okay, we have one last shot at us. Let's make it happen. And there it was.
Yeah, it took everything to get the game pulled, but it happened. I will mention, and this is, I guess, a little self-promo, but I did do a randomizer race with another community member, Gaming Druid, that week, and also tried out the Link to the Past Super Metroid randomizer. And those were both super fun ways to experience the game that week.
And it's funny, Link to the Past, I also, because I had a Sega and not an SNES, I missed Link to the Past as well when I was a kid. I didn't play that until it was released on the Game Boy Advance, because I was a huge Game Boy Advance kid. And I wish they had released this one on Game Boy Advance. My first Metroid was Fusion, which is the first Game Boy Advance one. So if they had done Super Metroid on Game Boy Advance, this might have been my first Metroid, and it would have been such a cool thing. But it's odd that those games get shoved together since they're so different. But
well, our next game is our first director episode of this recap. This director episode was with Jordan, and it's a very, very good game. Very well known. Both infamous and famous in its own rights. Final Fantasy X.
Never heard
and
of it.
I actually did my own podcast episode on this one.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that you had done that.
Yeah, I think of the episodes I can remember off the top of my head, I think this is one of the ones you actually remembered best. Final Fantasy X is very, very story heavy, but also has a remarkably solid gameplay core to it that kind of emphasized strategy in what I think of as the tail end of an era of RPGs that just were willing to let you just auto attack your way through the game and didn't really want to push you to be challenged. But personally, I've played it so many times at this point that I really want a version that has a cutscene skip, not because I hate the story, but because every time I start, it's like 4 hours before any meaningful battles.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Replaying it that week was not like, those cutscenes are great. I don't always want to watch them all, especially when I lose to a boss fight three or four times in a row, and I have to watch all 3 cutscenes before the fight every time.
I think every remake needs a cutscene skip. I played the HD remake. I'd happened to just win it about a month before it was pulled on the podcast. But yeah, a cutscene skip is necessary. I will say this about the game. I love it. The battle system is amazing. The switching out characters for different weaknesses, I just love that sort of battle system because I'm a huge turn-based fan. But this game really fell flat with me because there's 2 people in this world: people who hate Blitzball, people who are wrong. Blitzball is the worst. It's random and garbage, and fight me. I will fight anyone who disagrees.
I won't disagree.
That's gonna be.
I didn't have the worst time with Blitzball during the week we played it for the podcast, but I was also using super speed, and even with that, it took me 20 hours of game time using speed hacks to get everything.
And I used a walkthrough for Blitzball because I knew I wasn't going to like it, and I did everything right, and I go to the first game, and I have all the players in the right place, and boom, 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 I lose terribly because of the random element to it, and I'm like, okay.
Well, yeah, if you don't get the Jack shot, you're pretty much out of luck on Blitzball for the rest of the game.
Oh, man. Oh, shout out to Jordan. He did a great job. I think this is probably the only episode that's ever been dedicated to a cat.
Well, speaking of things as bad as Blitzball, our next game after that was Pigs in Space featuring Miss Piggy for the Atari. And listen, I try to approach like pre-NES games with an open mind. I know they couldn't do like nearly as much, but man.
I think this could be fully experienced. If you're like, should I play Pigs in Space? Just go watch a video. You can fully experience the entire game probably in less than 10 minutes, and you're not missing anything.
Yeah, I didn't really hate this one, actually. I know I got flack for it, but the gameplay was okay. It was middling at best, but it was okay. The thing I was upset about during this episode is that I think Nolan was the only one with any Muppet experience.
Yeah, that threw me a lot. Like, I figured that was exactly in like Kenny's age range to have watched like the original like Muppet Show and Muppets Tonight and all that, and nothing.
But to have not seen the Muppets, like, I binged a full season during that week when we drew the game.
Yeah,
almost 2.
Muppets. Yeah, watch the show. Don't play this game. Like, I'm gonna watch Muppets Christmas Carol this season. That's my favorite Christmas Carol. So, speaking of childhood nostalgia, we're gonna have to stop with these transitions. It's gonna get rough. One I played as a kid is Lego Island for the PC. I had all of these games as a kid. If you spend any time in our Discord in the Hobbies channel, you know I love Legos, and I did as a kid as well. But I had Lego Loco, I had Lego Chess, I had Lego Rock Raiders, I had Lego Knight Creator. That's the one Nolan said he played on the podcast. I had Lego Creator. I played these games for hours on my terrible computer, moving bricks around at 2 frames per second, trying to build 3D models. Oh man, I love these games. That being said, Lego Island probably isn't the one I'd recommend.
So when Lego Island got pulled, I was like really excited because I remembered really enjoying the game. And then I booted it up and realized that I was remembering Lego Island Extreme, the sequel to this one, which is a 3D platformer, like open world minigame game, which I ended up playing that for the most of the week instead.
It's always a good sign when you end up playing something else most of the week.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up the whole week, I think.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this game, and sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Garlyle, but this game, it's a Lego game, and there's some building elements to it, but it's ultimate. Kenny said it's like playing with the sets that are already built, and that's really what it is. Yeah, you can build a helicopter, but it's like this chunks that you kind of throw 5 chunks together, and then you get to fly it around. So it's novel, but didn't age well.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think I said it in my commentary too, but like childhood me at like 7 years old would have thought that this was the coolest damn thing ever. Adult me is done.
Next, we have Destiny of an Emperor. I believe this was a Three Kingdoms title.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that is based on the old Chinese historical fiction Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is like a critical piece of history for them and is basically a story about the unification of China. And having a JRPG developed by Capcom first off, but also just exploring like a historical story as the basis of its tale, as opposed to the usual like rescue a princess from a dragon of the era, was neat. Whether it was a good game or not was a little bit tricky because it was there's good parts to it, and also it's slow sometimes.
Well, props to Capcom. This was their first RPG. It was on the NES. It was very early in the life of JRPGs, and they went for the fences. They really did. But I think ultimately the death by menu, especially in that era where you have the big blocky text on the black background menus, and you're having to go and exits out of the menu completely, and you have to restart, and that's going to be a hard sell for people.
Yeah, even with like emulation speed up, that was a rough one for the week. I will mention I was listening to the episode again, and Kenny was still playing Stone Soup Dungeon Crawl at this point. And I wanted to shout out Dustin's pun about armies and sleeveys.
All right, I laughed. That was little armies in your little sleeveys. Yes, I do recall that.
Those were the two best things about I think that entire episode for me. So
I was gonna mention he was still playing. That's on my notes in a lot later episode. I talk about he's still playing DCSS.
I had it in another episode too.
He eventually did 100% that game. It's so ridiculous.
He did. He got all 15 runes and beat the game.
That's amazing.
What a legend.
But yeah, Destiny and Emperor still has your tactics in Chinese language, so you can't actually read what they do, and you don't want to read it anyway because menus are terrible.
Next up, going from early NES to very recent on the GBA, was the end of a series with Mega Man 04. Kind of a surprise that we just skipped straight to the ending, and that was certainly a discussion that came up on the episode.
Yeah, I'm ready to make a rule that we can't do that. That's not okay. And especially for this one, so story-driven. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Garlyle. Those of you who don't know, Garlyle has a Mega Man podcast, so I feel like we should just let him take the lead on this one.
Listen, one of these days, I'll just have like an entire hour talking about this by myself. I don't need this podcast to do that.
He is right. It is going to take that long to talk about this one when he does get around to it. I will just say that I enjoyed the Z-Knuckle. I know a lot of people didn't. I thought it was really nice, and the ways they used it for like the actual puzzle traversal for certain things was really cool. But can we talk about the music? Because that got kind of glanced over during the episode, and it is amazing because all of the Mega Man Zero soundtracks are so good.
I'm a Mega Man hater, and that's actually one of the cool things about listening to Garlyle's podcast, because I've gotten appreciation for the games, even though I can't play them because I'm bad. But music, I love Mega Man music. It's the only thing I've like spent time doing playlists on just so I can listen to it. There's so many games and such a great body of music.
It is so nice that Capcom has put those on Spotify now. Yeah, which hopefully this doesn't age poorly and they have removed them, but...
Well, we've discussed it on NGP, so now it's going to happen.
Now it's gonna
That is true.
I think one of the things that's hard to swallow for this one is that there's no boss abilities. That's really defining for Mega Man, is that you beat a boss and you get an ability. And being a Super Metroid fan, I need my upgrades. So not getting an upgrade from a boss, I feel like that would be a turnoff for me.
That is true. The option they gave to just not get an ability at the end of the fight too, by fighting a weaker version, was whatever type of ability you could get, which was pretty minor, being locked out of that, even potentially, was kind of dull.
The next game was, it's Mario is Missing, and if you know, you know. It's a game that felt to me like a bad fan-made ROM hack for Mario.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's add some air quotes, it's Mario is Missing, because I appreciate the attempt at edutainment and hey, at least they're trying to work with a company and get somebody that people know to draw kids to something about learning, but dear Lord. I had the fortune of playing the SNES one too this week, which is a competent game compared to the other ones, and it's still terrible.
The best lore that I've had on this podcast is Kenny was a substitute teacher for a while. I didn't know that. I spent a decade as a teacher before I got my new job, and I will tell you, for edutainment games, no, this isn't it. This is why kids hate edutainment games, is they've played games like this, and then when you try to get them into something fun, they're like, oh, this is dumb. I play, Mario Kart. This is going to be super dumb. And you're like, no, it's not. It's not. Mario is Missing, I promise. And no, they've already been ruined by bad edutainment games.
Yeah, I played, I think it was the NES and the SNES versions during that week. And what surprised me is how they're so wildly different. For a game that seems like they didn't put any effort into, they're so wildly different between versions that they clearly put in the effort to make it bad.
Yeah, the PC version's even completely different from those too, and somehow they screwed up every single one.
They were on a mission.
I agree with Nolan. He voted to remove it from the Retro Master List, and I've been for that. I want a reverse Patreon pool where we all submit 2 games, and to be removed from the Retro Master List.
And all of them get picked automatically.
No, they get removed forever. They're just never.
Call. Okay, well, next we had Digimon World. The only thing I want to talk about here is how Dustin got absolutely shafted by the game by getting Nunumon.
Oh, my heart hurt for him.
It was kind of fitting that
from how hard I was laughing.
Yeah, it was kind of fitting just how much, given that he got Nunumon, he kept not wanting to talk about Digimon going to the bathroom in that episode.
Upumon.
Well, and I literally have one line in my notes here. It's not much a game. I didn't play, but the hidden, random, and complicated. That's, I feel like, sums up the whole game. You have these hidden mechanics and random elements of evolution where you will have, like Dustin did. He's the guide follower. He probably checked every box and made sure he had everything, and he still gets the worst Digimon that screws his playthrough. So why would you play this game? No, throw it away.
Yeah, it's so rare that we come across a game that nobody is able to find or mine the data to figure out how it even works.
Yeah, my understanding, I was looking into it that week, a lot of the old guides you will find on the usual places like GameFAQs and stuff, they were based on a published strategy guide. The data that strategy guide was given was incorrect. And so like the proper values and what the actual triggers are is mostly known now, but that doesn't really matter because whether you're looking at the correct data, you'll never know. And for a game that's just this obfuscated, like, I love some of the ideas this game is trying, but man, was this a hard sell. And I always hoped that Digimon games would be good. I know some people who love them, but this can't have been one of the good ones.
No, it wasn't.
When you have dinosaurs that evolved into gun robots, you think you would have a lot to work with, but guess not.
Mini Frigimon.
Our next episode was quite a special one, because longtime editor and producer of the podcast, Tom Tate, joined the cast on what was his final edited episode in order to talk about the randomly selected Little Samson, which that was a game that I hadn't actually known about, despite the fact that its rarity apparently made it a little bit famous, and it wasn't half bad.
Yeah, that was super interesting to me during that week. Was like, for collectors, it's such a well-known title, but for everyone else, it's like completely a hidden gem.
Well, yeah, it sells $1,000 a copy for a used copy. So if you're, and thankfully there's emulation now. But I will say this: I love Tom. Tom, shout out to you, love you. You've been a great member of the podcast, and he came in prepared for this episode. He had all of the history. He had development notes. He was a little bit intimidating. Now that
and
I'm
that
doing
wasn't
the
for a
podcast.
game that he individually selected. Like, he pulled a list to have randomized, and I'm sure he had the same list of notes for every game on that list.
Maybe.
The man has got to have been planning this for like 4 years.
I will say what really stood out to me was the animations of this game. It's late in the NES's life, and it really does show how
it feels like an SNES game.
Yeah,
right.
I love the little spin jump with Samson. It's so cute, and it was really fun to watch for those of us who don't play along. Sorry.
I could not stop jumping when I noticed that animation. It was so good. That being said, the Golem was my favorite character.
Brojem the Golem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was the weirdo who actually just liked Samson himself. He's just all around, like, useful, not exceptional in any way, but actually just fun and smooth to play, and that's what I cared about the most. So
the next game was actually our first one of the new year. Before I get there, are we going to talk about the anniversary episode? Is it going to get its own section here? Are we going to?
I was wondering.
We can talk about it just like really quickly here, just as part of it.
This next game was selected as not part of a random list. We actually had our anniversary episode, and everybody got to come on and pitch a game, and the guys put it into a bucket and randomized it, and that's how we actually selected this next game. I don't know if you guys participated. I don't remember. I did submit.
I think
Rogue
we were
Squadron.
all there. Does anyone have a favorite pitch from that episode? Because mine was very clearly Ninjago. The guys just loved it so much. One of our community members' kids woke up and joined in just for that to pitch Majora's Mask, and it was fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah, I kind of wanted Majora's Mask to get picked after that. I brought WarioWares to the table, and even then, I was just like, okay, that was cute. Let's play Majora's Mask.
Yeah, can I change my vote to Majora's Mask?
Well, I will say I've never been so happy to lose a pool, because the next game that was actually chosen was The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages for the Game Boy Color, which when that got chosen, just the crash of nostalgia that went over me. This is one of my very first Zelda experiences. I was a Game Boy kid. If you doubt this game is good, understand this is the week that Metroid Dread came out, and being the Metroid fanboy here, not only did I play Metroid Dread, but I also beat this game, so it's that good.
Oh, I beat both games. I did linked game and did everything. So again, I had just played through Ages and Seasons earlier this year on my own. I was cleaning up through the Zelda games and did that. Oracle of Ages was also the game I mentioned earlier that Nolan had pointed out for Games Done Quick.
Yeah. If you don't know, our host Nolan, he actually did speed runs for Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Switch. He speed run the original Game Boy version as well earlier, but he was one of the pioneers of the Switch version, and so he loves this game. He and I have that in common. We want to get the same remake treatment that Link's Awakening did.
Yeah, definitely agree there.
I would say that if you aren't familiar with these games, their 2 versions were released. There was actually one of the interesting things about the podcast. They talked about there were actually 3 that were supposed to be made. You know, a blue, a red, and a green. I don't know what they would do with the 3rd game, because the way this works is that you can start in either game, then you can password to bring over your progress, and it continues the story. And there's some extra boss battles and end to the story. I don't know how they would have done that with a 3rd game, to start in any of the 3 games and doing them in any order. That would have been insane. But you get a lot of bonus content doing that. You get the 3rd level of the sword, and again, different bosses, and I just love this game. Being the the Ocarina of Time fanboy I am, they brought like 8-bit versions of that music into the game. You got little 8-bit Zoras and Gorons. It's an amazing game, and if you haven't played it, if you're a Zelda fan at all, you will like this. Although Dustin did reveal, how do we feel about Dustin hating puzzles?
It's not terribly a surprise given his response to certain puzzle games in the past. I'm not going to say I'm not a little disappointed, but also I kind of understand the mediocre response to this game, but I'm a little alone in that.
What I love during this episode is how often Dustin would present something. So he's like, you have a lot of items in the game, like like a seed satchel and others. And he kept adding "and others" as the rest of his list for everything.
That's his style.
So that is worth going back to listen to for sure.
You know, Garlyle, you slipped that in. What made you feel mediocre about this game? What turns you off about it?
I just feel like this one is kind of a little bit too much like it's Link's Awakening 1.2. Like, not to say Link's Awakening was a bad game, but I don't, like, other than the meta level, like, oh, there's 2 versions of this game and the interesting, like, complexities there, I don't feel like it necessarily brings that much to the table to excite me compared to the rest of the series.
I will say, if I had to choose something that's unique about it in the series as a whole, it's the boss fights. The boss fights, much like the theme of the game, are puzzles in themselves. A lot of times it's not about your combat or how much sword damage you're doing. In fact, the ring system in this, I had a ring that made me do double damage and take double damage, but I would take that off for most boss fights because you're just having to figure out how to use the item or the boss fight itself to manipulate damage. So I just love everything about this game. So that's, I think, the only thing unique I could say it brings to the table. But I don't think anybody would be disappointed playing this game.
Well, speaking of being disappointed in a game,
I'm glad you took that transition.
Our next game is Goblins.
I think you had one too many. I think you had one too many stutters in there. Yeah, Goblins, classic PC point and click. Just like I want to say I like this game. I almost really want to say I like the idea of this game, of just this comedic, like, every puzzle is just there in the screen, which gets you out of some of the things that point and clicks do, of like, oh, you missed this item like 10 screens or an hour back into the game. Well, you're screwed now. Like, that was the era this game came out of, which it didn't do. But then it's a trial and error game where you have a stamina bar before your stage fully resets and your password maintains your stamina, and just, it became a pain to play, and that's not what you need in a comedy game.
Yeah, I was shocked. I made it to like the third screen of this game into the house, and I was shocked that the guys put as much effort into playing this and made as much progress as they did. I would not have blamed them this week if they had just given up.
I am a fan of Sierra Online as nostalgia would draw me into it. I was a fan of the Space Quest games, which was from Sierra, and so this game should have connected with me, but
it probably shouldn't have because Sierra didn't actually make it. They inherited the property. If I remember right from the episode.
No, you're true. Yeah, they because they changed it to Goblin Quest later. I think they talked about that. Yeah, trial and error gameplay is bad. It's just I will say the biggest travesty of this episode isn't that. It's that Nolan said that Resident Evil is an evolution of a point and click series, which I almost threw my phone across the room. I'd forgotten about that. But no, it's not. This game is terrible.
Okay. Counterpoint, it is. But that's mostly by tracing the lineage where, like, Alone in the Dark is survival horror, and that was basically a step up from how they used to do point and clicks. And Alone in the Dark evolved into Resident Evil. So the bloodline's there, but we're talking, like, you know, birds and primates. At some point, they're very different games.
And well, Alone in the Dark is... I got a heart for that game. My dad and I listen to that episode of the podcast. Go back and listen to Alone in the Dark on New Game Plus.
They didn't like that one either.
Haters. That's a hard game to love if you have no nostalgia.
Our next director episode, which was sponsored for us by Gamma Girl, was Final Fantasy Legend 3, or Saga 3. They talked a whole lot about the decision to market it as a Final Fantasy game in the West and how that probably affected sales and how that might have, like, maybe not been necessary, but maybe was. But also, like, Saga games are a very, very interesting beast that evolved specifically from, like, succeeding Final Fantasy II to begin with. And I've always had trouble with them for a variety of reasons. This was the first one I kind of actually liked.
Oh. I liked this game too. It was one of the first RPGs I ever played. I think, it's hard to remember that far back. I think Final Fantasy VII was my first RPG, but I had this one on the Game Boy, and I remember playing it. I think I just had more patience as a kid to sit there and figure out these systems over hours and hours and hours, whereas today it's a little bit harder to do that. But I liked it. I played it on the port on my mobile. I played it at work when there was downtime, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's not that I didn't like the game. I did, but I just kind of bounced off it during that week. This was also the episode that I had down where Kenny was still playing Dungeon Crawl.
He's still playing Dungeon Crawl this whole time. It's not clear if he ever plays any other game. But
so just to put that into perspective, I'm pretty sure Dungeon Crawl was pulled in like April.
Yeah, it's been months.
It was a long time ago, and he was still playing it in October. Actively playing it.
I think with this game, one of the things that was a tough sell was you can eat or install parts or meat from the monsters that die, and it will change the character into a different cyborg or beast or something. And the guys were really having trouble settling on whether they liked that or not. But one thing that was not mentioned on that episode was that there is a unit you can get on your spaceship, the Talon, called a Flush X, which is a toilet, but it wipes your character back to default. And if they had known that, experimentation is a lot less punishing when you can just reset your character to default, not the default level, but the default race
class,
or
right?
species.
Yeah. They did mention being able to reset, so maybe they just didn't mention it by name, but they had talked about that system.
Yeah, it also comes fairly late into the game. I think I was like 8 hours in or something, and I still hadn't found that. And that was with a guide knowing where to go, so...
Our next game was a big nostalgia bomb for a lot of people. Even I had some nostalgia for it, even though I didn't play the game. I was familiar with the IP. It is Dick Tracy, and we played this on the Sega Genesis. I have to say that the movie came out when I was a kid, and I think I saw it. But looking through pictures for a profile pic, I try to change my profile pic for every game. Not anymore because people said it wasn't funny. But the Madonna pictures from the movie that opened some eyes for me. She's quite attractive in that movie. That's about all I have to say about this game.
I wanted to say I was very impressed with their restraint on that episode. Extremely impressed.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the other things I think I played the SNES version to start with during this week, and it is wildly different and wildly worse than the Genesis version. The manual, I thought, with all of its little quotes and like the dialogue from the mobsters and everything, was probably better than my experience with the game during the week. It was very lighthearted and felt like it came out of a comic book, like the Dick Tracy comics.
I always feel like it's telling when, again, like watching a movie and remembering that and looking at the manual is a bit more entertaining than the game. Though I didn't hate the game in this case. It's actually got some neat ideas going on in it. It just has really repetitive stage design around those unique ideas, and they kind of wear out their welcome.
It does, and the guys also complained a lot about the unarmed levels and how it was not necessary in the slightest.
I think the difficulty in general was something they talked about, and they brought up this idea, which I want to talk about maybe a little bit later, but that Kenny recommended it. He's like, yeah, New Game Plus, but knowing people won't beat it. It's too hard to beat. Like, you won't finish. And I don't know if I'm okay with that. If you can't finish a game by putting time into it, I don't know if I could recommend it for New Game Plus.
I mean, you have to imagine, like, that's the category that arcade games are going to fall into. Like, almost all arcade games, like your Dig Dug and your Pac-Man and all of that.
Vertical space shooters.
And, like, Bubble Bobble you can beat, but I don't expect people to beat Bubble Bobble. Our next game was another director episode with Zachary. This game was Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage, or as Dustin liked to call it, SM and V MC.
And are you going to do it for the rest of the episode?
No, I will not.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to try to spell MVCSAVMC and Knuckles every single time I have to refer to this game.
Brojem mentioned it, like we talked about it earlier. We're not beat 'em up people. This one was definitely, again, too hard for me. It's not my kind of game, but the soundtrack was amazing. I loved the feeling of the game and the design. Like, the Spider-Man charm was totally there for this one.
Yeah, this game, I think there's a bunch of things in it that were really neat. Like, it's really fun to, like, grab enemies with spider webs and just, like, pull them in and slam them against the person behind you and just knock them both out. Like, stuff like that is really cool. The game just has, like, a reverse difficulty curve, where it throws you in the deep end right at the beginning, and then, like, only, like, 5 or 6 stages in, after a few bosses, you actually start to get the summons that make the game reasonable to play.
Yeah, I never got to stage 2.
Oh, wow. I will say that with superhero games, I was introduced. I wasn't a huge superhero fan before the Marvel Universe and all that. Batman Arkham Asylum brought me into superhero gaming, so I always use that as a standard, which is unfair for a retro game. But that being said, I think this game did the same thing. It was so true to the source material. It tried to bring it as the comic books presented it. They really went full on, no, this is a superhero comic book themed video game. So I appreciated the tone that they took.
I noticed another thing in this episode, and I had noticed it for a few episodes, I think, at this point. But Has anybody noticed that Dustin has really lost his patience with Kenny recently? And getting like verbally abused a little bit more.
Listen, when you don't have Nolan around to stop them, things boil over sometimes a little bit, and nobody's there to say hey.
My notes, literally, my first line is, when Nolan is gone, they just yell at each other.
Yeah, it happens.
I don't know. They're brothers. That's what they are. They sound like me and my brother when we get together and argue about video games. That's what we do.
Speaking of getting together with friends to talk video games or play them, Tales of Symphonia was the next game drawn. Probably one of the, I'd say, biggest titles in terms of just randomly drawn during this last set of games. Because this wasn't a producer pool or anything, despite being kind of a big name. It was a JRPG with multiplayer, because it's actually a fully active battle in an era of turn-based games. And the thing that shocked me the most this time was that none of the guys had any experience whatsoever with the Tales series.
Yeah. Garlyle and I have talked about this. We've actually talked about submitting it to Patreon pools together because we're fanboys. I was also surprised they weren't familiar with it, especially since my JRPG and RPG in general experience is so low. I can probably count the JRPGs I've completed on one hand, and this is one of them. And I had a lot of nostalgia for it. It's the tone. It's got to be the tone. I just love the characters in it. They do fill some traditional kind of anime JRPG tropes, but the way that Lloyd is this innocent, he's just a do-gooder. He's just trying to protect his friend, and it's so innocent and pure. I just like playing him. I like following the characters, and there's some heart-wrenching twists in the story, and it's good. It's good.
Yeah, I didn't have any experience with Symphonia before that week, but I have played Tales of Zestiria a little bit, and I wonder, because Dustin said he loved this game, and I imagine he'll probably end up finishing it. But he said that the kiddish chibi characters were a little bit much. Him and Nolan, I think, both said that. So I wonder if they would like the more modern ones like Zestiria with the full character models a little bit more.
They might. One of the things you mentioned is about the fact that, the characters are a little bit cliche in anime, and, the story sets itself up with, one of the most traditionally, classic, oh, this is the journey of the chosen to save the world type things. But I think one of the strengths this game has is in the fact that it just uses those, immediately recognizable archetypes and stories to hook you just minute one, so you know what's going on and you can, care about these people from Mark 1, as opposed to, to kind of really call back, Tactics Ogre, way back when, was just, a really dry story. Yeah, it was intense and serious and dramatic right from the beginning, but without that hook to land you and get you familiar with things, it was hard for things to really matter. And I think that's the strength that Symphonia really brings to the table, is you care.
Now, this got a little bit of flack on Discord for the episode not giving enough credit to the story. But Nolan said on the podcast it's better than Final Fantasy X. He said that. So I don't know if I agree with that, but it's up there with some of my favorite just stories in general.
That's going to sound that way when you spend half the episode mentioning Final Fantasy comparisons.
I mean, to be fair, the story setup is exactly the same as Final Fantasy X.
Yeah.
Beat for beat. I listened back through the episode and I was like, yeah, they're not wrong.
They're not wrong. Let me bring something up that is wrong. Our final game retro recap. Bob, B-O-B. It's an acronym. It's not an acronym.
Big old booty.
I don't know. Big old booty.
Better off buried.
Bob is a SNES game. It's a platformer. It's very, I got Duke Nukem 2 vibes from it. Kenny brought up some games that he compared it to. He brought up James Bond Jr., which I didn't even know was a game, although I do remember the theme song from the show. But I got Duke Nukem 2 vibes because of the different weapons that you can get, but ultimately it was pretty blow.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I can see like its level design and stuff feels like it was a PC platformer team that was just taking that and assuming it worked on the SNES and stuff. And like it didn't. I think this is actually like qualitatively an okay game. It is playable, but I found it to be honestly one of the most soulless games we have had on the show. It just lacks so much heart.
I think it's really funny to have Bob as our last game for the recap, because I think it shares a lot of similarities of mediocrity with the first game in the recap, Inspector Gadget. There's too much going on, but the level design just really falls short.
Actually, that is a good bookend. You're right. It really is just cool ideas that just couldn't be properly fleshed out and given enough of a game to shine.
Yeah, it's a bread sandwich. It's a bread only bot. I think the best part of this episode, listen all the way to the end and hear the guys sing Switchfoot. And shout out to Dan Willett. I did not listen to the edited episodes because being a director, I listen to the not unedited episodes. One of our perks. So this week, preparing for this podcast, I listened to the edited episodes, and shout out to Dan. He's been doing a great job. So thank you very much for being our editor.
Yeah, we hadn't mentioned Dan yet, but since the anniversary episode, we have had Dan as the editor, and he has absolutely been doing a phenomenal job.
Yeah, it has to be said. You don't even notice really that the editor has changed, and there's few things that are quite as big of a compliment as when that's the case.
So the last thing I wanted to see, because I know actually all three of us have already played it. Did we have any thoughts on Ikaruga for the upcoming episode?
We're gonna do that, huh? Yes. So this week we did pull a game. It's a vertical space shooter called Ikaruga. I could say it again.
Ikaruga.
Thank you, Garlyle. I can't say the name, so that's how that's going. My initial thoughts on it are, oh my gosh, this game is so hard, and I'm not going to be able to get past the second level. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, but I am like in love. It reminds me so much of Nier Automata. The beginning of that game starts with a very similar shmup section. And like the whole vibe of it is really, really good.
Yeah, this game, a little bit of shmup community lore here. This game routinely places on like top 10 shmup lists anywhere you look. There's a couple people out there that actually quite dislike this game, and honestly, spoiler, depending on mood, sometimes I actually really hate this game too. But also, like, the level of puzzle and complexity and depth to it, it's going to be very interesting to see where the guys land. Because, like, I know Dustin loves shmups, but I also know from Oracle of Ages he's not so much on puzzles. And on the flip side, this might bring something to the table with enough creativity that maybe Nolan or Kenny will actually turn out to really get into it. So
play it with us this week.
So before we wrap things up, the usual question from the Retro Recap that I want to spring on you guys with no preparation is, what episode, or rather, what game did you have the most fun playing out of our last 22 games? And which episode would you recommend people go back and listen to?
Well, I will say this. The game has to be Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages. I'm a huge Zelda fan, and the Game Boy Color era of Zeldas, if you haven't played them, you need to play them, and play both of them. Play Oracle of Seasons, password over to the next game. It's not a huge sell. It's not going to take you a big amount of time, but just do it. And if I had to choose an episode, it's going to be the I guess it's not a director episode. It's a Tom Tate episode, Little Samson. Tom has just been a huge part of the community, and saying goodbye to him was a little bit sad. He's still there. He's still, join our Discord. He's still there. But he really brought it, and hearing the four of them talk about it was just a really entertaining episode.
Yeah, those are great choices. I think for me, the game that I had the most fun with was definitely Super Metroid. Being able to run races and do randomizers during that week was such a blast. And the community was so on fire that week. Everything was rolling so fast the whole week. It was crazy. And coming off of Super Mario Brothers, it was an experience to be in the community that week. The episode I would recommend going back to is Jet Set Radio. Because Dustin had so much fun with the episode, even though he didn't have as much fun with the game. And I think that goes for the other two as well. So definitely my recommendations there.
My personal favorite that I played out of these might actually go to Streets of Rage 2, surprisingly. Mostly because I was already familiar with so many of the games. And this one, it was tough, and I recognize the limitations, but also, I understand now why people say it's one of the best retro beat-em-ups. I get it. And having that feeling of, okay, I get it on an old game is always a really good thing to have. Relatedly, the episode I suggest people go back and listen to is Tales of Symphonia. You heard us talk about how much we liked it, but also we largely knew it. We had familiarity with the franchise, and the guys didn't. And hearing them just discover and enjoy something new like that was excellent to me. So, with that, our trip down memory lane is over, but the retro gaming doesn't necessarily have to stop there. If you liked what you heard on this episode, or want to come hang out with us, or the hosts, or any of our wonderful community, feel free to come by on Discord, say hi, drop a line. We're only doing a second community retro recap because people said, hey, we actually like this, and it's fun. And I don't know about you guys, but I had fun doing it again.
Oh, I had fun.
No, it's
great to be a part.
Sorry, Klen, I stepped on you. It's been a great honor to do this. I love talking to you guys, and it's been a blast. Speaking of people we love, we want to give a shout out every single week to our producer level Patreon supporters. If you want to support us on Patreon, go to patreon.com, look up NGP. But our producers are Marlian, Anthony, Antonin, Ben, Bethany Fox, Brunkt, Carrie, Captain Protein, Dan the Man, DB Muppet, Francesca, Gimbin. Hi, I'm Josh, Joey, Jordan, Justin, Klen, Corey, Lorelei, Matthew, Maxima, Mr. Lattes, Nahul, Secret Duck of Evermore, Shauna Thomas, Unbelievable, Wardonis, William, and Zion. And of course, our wonderful director level Patreon supporters, which are yours truly, Brojem, Garlyle over there, and our friend Zachary.
And a huge special thanks to Dustin, Kenny, and Nolan for inviting us to do this again. A big thank you to Dan Willett for editing and producing this podcast. And a huge thank you to you two for joining me on this. If you have anything to plug, now is the time to, the guys aren't here to stop us, is my point.
They can always edit us out, but yeah, they mentioned it at the beginning. I've got a couple podcasts. Garlyle, you have a podcast, and Brojem, you have a full-time job. So,
well, that doesn't stop me from podcasting.
It doesn't stop me either.
No, okay, I'll start this. I do not have a podcast, although I might have a Lego podcast someday. But join us in Discord if you want to hear more about that. But hey, Garlyle, plug your excellent podcast because I'm a huge fan. So plug it.
Yeah, I am the host of What Am I Podcasting For, which is the podcast where I have been playing every Mega Man game in roughly chronological order. At the same time as this episode goes up on NGP, I should actually be uploading the first episode of my second year. So, yeah, there's quite a bit there now, and you can probably find it just by searching What Am I Podcasting For, or go to waipf.podbean.com.
And Glenn, where can we find you and your podcasts?
Yep, I'm on Discord constantly, so if you join the community, you will find me whether you want to or not. But my podcasts, the first one is Hindsight. That is my solo podcast where I talk about my memories of games from my past. It's a little bit similar to NGP in a little bit of a way. The other podcast I co-host with my friend Rixus Talon is Alter Narratives, where we take fictional stories and we kind of put a spin on them. So check those out if you would like to.
Well, with that, our regular hosts will be back next week with Ikaruga. And until the next retro recap, I've been not Dustin.
I've been not Kenny.
And I've been not Nolan.
And this has been New Game Plus.